Take your clothes off and get in my bed right now." Mountain Man ordered the shivering fat girl. Then he saved her life. "Take your clothes off and get in my bed right now." The words cracked through the freezing night like gunfire. For a heartbeat, Aurora Rory Sinclair thought she was dreaming, but then she felt the pain, the burning in her lungs, the needles of ice in her skin, and realized it was real. She was on the floor of a stranger's cabin, half conscious, her breath coming out in shallow gasps. Outside, the storm howled with a hunger that could kill a person in minutes, and standing over her was a giant of a man, broad-shouldered, wild-eyed, snow in his hair and beard. "I said take them off," he barked again, stripping the blankets from the bed. "Those clothes are frozen. You'll be dead in 10 minutes if you keep them on." Rory whimpered, too weak to move. "Please, don't hurt me." "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, voice breaking through the harshness. "I'm going to save you." He turned his back quickly, giving her privacy. "I'm a doctor. Get out of those wet clothes and into the blankets. Now." His tone left no room for argument, but there was something in it, authority wrapped in care, that made her believe him. With shaking hands, she obeyed. When he turned back, she was trembling under thick quilts, her lips blue, her eyelids fluttering. He knelt beside her, checking her pulse. "You're going to make it," he murmured, "but barely." And as the storm screamed outside, he worked through the night, a mountain man fighting death itself for a woman he'd never met. "Don't fall asleep," he whispered, pressing a warm cloth to her cheeks. "You're safe now, sweetheart. You're safe." By morning, the storm had buried the mountain beneath a white sea of silence. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled low, fighting back the cold that clawed at the windows. Rory awoke to the smell of coffee and the weight of thick quilts around her. For a moment she didn't know where she was, only that she was warm for the first time in days. Her body ached everywhere, her lips cracked, her skin red from the thaw. Then a low, steady voice came from across the room. "You're awake." She turned her head and saw him, the man from last night. He was enormous, standing beside the fire, sleeves rolled up, scars like pale lightning running across his forearms. His eyes, gray as the winter sky, softened when they met hers. "You nearly froze to death," he said. "I'm surprised you're even breathing." "Where am I?" she whispered. "Frozen Ridge, my cabin." He set a mug of broth beside her bed. "Drink." Slowly. Her hands shook as she obeyed, the heat burning down her throat and settling in her chest. "You said you were a doctor?" He nodded. "Was. Nathaniel Blackstone. Used to work in Boston." "Why aren't you there anymore?" His jaw tightened. "Because sometimes saving people isn't enough. Sometimes it breaks you instead." The pain in his voice was unmistakable, the pain of a man who'd lost more than he could bear. She didn't ask again. As the hours passed, Nathaniel, Nate, as he asked her to call him, moved around the cabin with quiet precision. He tended the fire, checked her temperature, replaced damp cloths, and brewed tea that smelled of mint and honey. When she tried to sit up, he placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "Easy," he said gently. "You've been through hell. Let your body catch up." Something about the way he said it, the calm authority, the unspoken care, made tears sting her eyes. "I thought I was going to die out there," she whispered. "You would have," he replied bluntly. "If you'd walked 10 more minutes, I'd be burying you instead of talking to you." Her voice trembled. Why did you help me?" He looked at her for a long time before answering. "Because I couldn't save the last one." The fire popped between them, and neither spoke again for a while. When she finally had the strength to eat, he sat across the room, giving her space. His movements were methodical, but every now and then his gaze flicked toward her, checking, measuring, making sure she was still breathing. Rory studied him too. The locals had called him the Ice Bear of Frozen Ridge, a man who lived alone and spoke to no one. But the man before her didn't look cruel or wild. He looked hurt. That night, as the snow outside glowed blue beneath the moonlight, she whispered into the stillness, "Thank you, Nate." He didn't turn, but she saw his shoulders tense, the smallest reaction, yet somehow full of meaning. "Get some rest," he said softly. "You're safe here." And for the first time since fleeing Winter Haven, she believed it. The next morning, sunlight poured through the frosted window panes, painting the cabin in gold. Outside, the world was buried under snowdrifts higher than a horse's back, but inside, warmth clung to the air. Wood smoke, coffee, and something new, the faint scent of hope. Rory tried to sit up, but her limbs felt heavy, her muscles stiff from days of cold. She found Nate already awake, splitting wood by the open door, his breath rising in clouds. He looked over when he heard her stir. "Don't even think about getting up," he said, half stern, half teasing. She gave a weak smile. "You always this bossy?" He grunted, tossing another log onto the fire. "Only when someone almost freezes to death on my doorstep." When he handed her a bowl of steaming soup, his fingers brushed hers, rough, calloused, but careful. "You keep that down. I'll start you on real food tomorrow." She tasted it, broth, potatoes, herbs, and for a moment closed her eyes. "It's the best thing I've ever eaten." He huffed a quiet laugh. "That's just hunger talking." "No," she said, voice softer now. "That's gratitude." Over the next few days, her strength returned. Nate checked her temperature twice a day, insisting she stay wrapped in blankets even when she protested. "You're stubborn," he said more than once. "So are you," she'd fire back, her green eyes glinting with mischief. He pretended not to smile, but she saw it, the faint curve at the corner of his mouth. As the storm subsided, the cabin settled into rhythm. Mornings began with Nate chopping wood while Rory prepared tea. Evenings ended with her curled by the fire, mending his worn shirts while he read by lamplight. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was easy, natural, the silence of two souls learning to breathe again. One afternoon, Nate surprised her by placing a fur-lined coat over her shoulders. "We're going outside," he said. Rory blinked. "Outside? I can barely walk across the room." "You need sunlight. You've been shut in too long." She followed him out onto the porch, clutching the railing. The air was crisp and sharp, the snow glittering like crushed glass. For the first time in days, she filled her lungs completely. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Nate stood beside her, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "It always is after the storm," he said quietly, "but most people never stay long enough to see it." Rory turned to look at him. The lines of grief etched into his face seemed softer now, less like scars, more like stories. "You stayed," she said gently. "Didn't have anywhere else to go." "Maybe," she said, voice trembling a little. "You just hadn't met anyone worth staying for." He looked at her then, really looked, and for a moment the cold didn't exist. That night, when the wind rose again, Rory dreamed of the storm that had nearly killed her. She woke in terror, her body drenched in sweat, gasping for air. Nate was beside her in an instant, kneeling by the bed. "You're safe," he said, gripping her shoulders. "It's just a dream." "I thought I was back there," she sobbed, "in the snow. I couldn't feel my hands." Without hesitation, he gathered her into his arms, holding her against his chest. "You're warm now," he whispered. "You're safe. I've got you." She clung to him, feeling the steady beat of his heart under her cheek. His scent, smoke, pine, leather, wrapped around her like the thickest blanket. When she finally calmed, she whispered, "I didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't," he said softly. "I don't sleep much anyway." And as the fire flickered low, she realized that the man who had saved her life was just as lost as she had been. And maybe, just maybe, they were meant to save each other. Days slid into weeks, and the rhythm of life on Frozen Ridge began to change. The howling wind outside softened to a whisper, and the cabin no longer felt like a shelter from death. It felt like a home. Rory had regained her strength. Her cheeks, once pale and hollow, now bloomed with color. She spent her mornings helping Nate tend to chores, feeding the chickens, stacking firewood, and learning to cook over an iron stove that hissed like a dragon. The first time she burned the bread, she hid it behind her back, mortified. Nate sniffed the air, smirked, and said, "If it's not black, it's not mountain bread." She laughed, a full, bright laugh that startled even herself. Nate froze, watching her as though he hadn't heard laughter in years. Maybe he hadn't. In the evenings, they'd sit by the fire. Rory would read from an old book she found on his shelf, Walden by Thoreau, her soft voice threading through the quiet, while Nate listened and whittled bits of wood into small shapes. A bird, a bear, a tiny woman with wild curls. "You carved me," she teased one night, holding up the figure. He shrugged, eyes on the fire. "Didn't mean to." "I like it," she said. "She looks strong." "She is," he replied quietly. That night, she dreamed of him, not as the gruff doctor who'd saved her, but as the man who laughed when she spilled soup, who built her a stool because she complained she couldn't reach the top shelf, who always made sure her side of the bed stayed warm before she lay down. But as their closeness grew, so did the questions she was too afraid to ask. One snowy afternoon, while Nate cleaned his medical kit by the window, Rory finally spoke. "Why did you really leave Boston?" He didn't answer right away. His hand stilled over the instruments. "Because I couldn't save my family." Rory swallowed. "You mean—" "My wife and son," he said, voice breaking. "Carriage accident in a storm not unlike the one that nearly killed you. I was at the hospital when it happened. I never forgave myself for not being there." Rory's heart clenched. "That wasn't your fault, Nate." He gave a sad, tired smile. "Maybe not. But the mountain doesn't ask questions. It just lets you disappear. That's why I came here." She wanted to reach out, to take his hand, but the pain in his eyes stopped her. Some wounds couldn't be touched, not yet. Later that night, she stood at the window, watching the snow drift down in lazy spirals. "Do you ever think of leaving?" she asked softly. "Not anymore," he said, walking up beside her. "This place is all I know." She looked at him then, her reflection shimmering beside his in the glass. "Maybe it's time you remember what warmth feels like again." His gaze dropped to her lips, then flicked away as he took a slow breath. "Careful, Rory." "Of what?" she asked, barely above a whisper. "Of thawing things that were meant to stay frozen." But it was too late. Something between them had already begun to melt. The next morning, she woke before dawn to find him outside, splitting wood shirtless, steam rising from his skin. Her breath caught, not just from the sight of his strength, but from the tenderness behind every motion. This was a man who'd been shattered but still kept going, one swing at a time. When he came back inside, she handed him a mug of coffee. "You work too hard," he smirked, "and you worry too much." "Maybe," she said, looking up at him, "but someone has to." He froze, something flickering in his gray eyes. Then, almost without thinking, he reached out and brushed a stray curl from her cheek. "You shouldn't look at me like that." "How should I look at you?" "Like I'm something you could save." She smiled faintly. "Maybe you already saved me. Maybe it's my turn now." For the first time, he didn't look away. His hand lingered at her face, rough thumb tracing the warmth of her skin. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, the fire roared higher. And the silence that followed wasn't awkward or heavy. It was full, humming with something new, fragile, and alive. The mountain was quieter now. Days passed gently, filled with the rhythm of work and laughter, and at night the wind sang softly through the trees like a lullaby. But even the calmest winters hide storms beneath their stillness, and both Rory and Nate felt it coming. One morning, Nate saddled his horse to ride down into Winter Haven for supplies. "I'll be back before dark," he told her, slipping his gloves on. Rory frowned. "You sure you should go alone? The roads are still bad." "I've lived here long enough to find my way home blind," he said with a crooked smile. But when the cabin door closed behind him, the silence felt heavier than usual. Rory busied herself with chores, sweeping, cooking, feeding the chickens, anything to drown the anxious thrum in her chest. By dusk, when he still hadn't returned, fear began to creep in. She wrapped herself in a shawl and stepped outside, the cold biting her cheeks. In the distance, thunder rumbled. No, not thunder. Hooves. A group of riders appeared through the trees, torches flickering in the wind. At the front rode a man she recognized instantly, her stepfather. "Evening, sweetheart," he sneered, dismounting. "You gave me quite the chase." Rory froze, blood draining from her face. "How did you—" "Town folks said a red-haired girl was living up here with the mountain doctor. Took some persuasion to get the rest out of 'em." His eyes glinted cruelly. "You thought you could just run away? You still owe me, girl, and I plan to collect." Rory backed toward the cabin door, her voice trembling. "Nate will be back any minute." "Good," he said, pulling a pistol from his belt. "Then I'll settle with him, too." She bolted inside, slamming the door, heart pounding. Her mind raced. She'd faced cold, hunger, despair, but never this. She shoved the table against the door and grabbed Nate's rifle from the wall, though her hand shook so badly she could barely hold it. Outside, her stepfather's voice rang out, sharp as a whip. "You open this door, Aurora, or I'll burn the place to the ground." Tears blurred her vision, but she didn't move. "I'm not yours anymore," she shouted back. "You sold me like property. You lost your right to call me daughter." The door rattled under a hard kick. The wood cracked. Then a single shot echoed through the forest. A warning shot. The pounding stopped. Silence stretched, and then she heard it, a voice she knew, calm, deep, unmistakable. "You might want to lower that gun before I make you regret ever touching it." Nate. He stepped out of the darkness like a ghost risen from snow, coat dusted white, rifle steady in his hands. The men turned toward him, startled. Her stepfather sneered. "You think you can stop me, Doctor? She's my property." "Not up here she isn't," Nate said, his voice cold enough to cut steel. "Up here she's under my roof and my protection." The man laughed harshly. "You're going to shoot me, city boy?" "I won't need to," Nate said. "The mountain buries men who don't listen." For a long, tense moment, no one moved. Then the wind picked up, howling between the trees, carrying with it the sound of something ancient, the groan of snow about to fall. A warning. "Get off my land," Nate said. "Now." The men hesitated, but when a crack split the air, the sound of snow shifting dangerously above the ridge, they turned and fled, spooked by the mountain itself. Only her stepfather lingered, glaring at Nate before spitting into the snow. "You can't keep her forever." "Watch me," Nate said, cocking the rifle. The man mounted his horse and rode off, vanishing into the storm. When the last hoofbeat faded, Nate lowered the gun and turned toward Rory. She was standing in the doorway, shaking from head to toe. He crossed to her in 2 strides and cupped her face in his hands. "You all right?" She nodded, tears spilling over. I thought I lost you." He brushed his thumb over her cheek. "You're never losing me, Rory. Not to the cold, not to him, not ever." And as the storm closed around the mountain once more, she realized it wasn't just his strength that made her feel safe. It was the way he looked at her, like she was worth saving, worth fighting for, worth everything. The next morning broke gray and heavy, the air sharp enough to sting the lungs. Rory awoke to find Nate already outside, pacing the porch with his rifle slung across his shoulder. His expression was grim, the quiet calm of a man who knew danger wasn't finished yet. "He'll come back," she said softly, stepping beside him. "I know." His voice was steady, but his eyes burned with resolve. "Men like him don't leave empty-handed." "Then let me go," she whispered. "If I leave, he'll have no reason to hurt you." Nate turned to her sharply. "Don't ever say that again. He's after me, not you. And that's exactly why I'm staying between you and him." He stepped closer, his hand brushing her cheek. "You think after all this, I'd just let you walk back into hell?" Her throat tightened. "You'll get yourself killed." "Then I'll die doing the right thing." Before she could argue, a gunshot split the air. The sound echoed off the frozen cliffs, followed by shouting, her stepfather's voice. Nate grabbed her hand. "Get inside, now!" Rory obeyed, her heart hammering as she crouched by the window. Outside, 6 riders were closing in, their torches flickering through the snow. Her stepfather rode at the front, eyes wild. "Bring her out, Blackstone," he bellowed, "or I'll burn your cabin to ashes." Nate stepped off the porch, snow crunching beneath his boots. His rifle was steady in his hands, his breath a pale ghost in the air. "You already tried fire," he called back. "You'll find the mountains colder than you think." The men laughed, but their laughter died when the wind roared, hard and fast, carrying with it the deep, guttural rumble of shifting ice. Nate's eyes darted to the ridge above. He'd known the sound all his life. Avalanche. "Get down!" he shouted. The mountainside exploded in motion, a wave of white thunder crashing down, trees splintering like matchsticks. The riders screamed, horses bolting in terror. Rory could only watch as snow swallowed the clearing in seconds. When the world went still again, silence hung heavy, the kind of silence that follows death. Through the veil of snow Nate emerged, coughing, brushing ice from his coat. He had thrown himself flat, letting the avalanche pass just wide of the cabin. Rory ran to him, tears freezing on her lashes. "Nate!" He turned, breathless but smiling faintly. "Told you, the mountain buries men who don't listen." Her stepfather was gone, buried somewhere beneath the snow and trees he'd tried to use as cover. Rory clung to Nate, sobbing into his chest. "It's over," she whispered. He held her tightly, pressing his lips to her hair. "No, sweetheart," he murmured, voice rough with emotion. "It's just beginning." In that frozen silence, under a sky breaking open with the first light of dawn, the mountain man who had once lost everything finally found something worth living for again. And the woman who'd been cast aside by the world found the warmth that would never fade. The days that followed were quiet, the kind of silence that only comes after chaos. The avalanche had sealed the pass, cutting them off from the rest of the world. But neither Rory nor Nate minded. The cabin became a sanctuary once more, filled with warmth, laughter, and the slow rhythm of healing. Sometimes Rory would wake in the middle of the night, haunted by echoes of her stepfather's threats. And every time, Nate would reach for her, pulling her against his chest until she stopped trembling. "You're safe here," he'd whisper against her hair. "Nothing's ever getting to you again." By spring, the snow began to melt, revealing wildflowers pushing through the thawing ground. Rory planted a small garden outside the cabin, herbs, carrots, wild berries, life blooming where death had once loomed. One morning, as she stood in the doorway, sunlight spilling across her face, Nate came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "You know," he said quietly, "when I found you that night, I thought I was saving your life." She turned, smiling softly. "And now? Now I know you were saving mine." Rory looked up into his eyes, the same gray eyes that had once been filled with grief, but now held something gentler, steadier. "You gave me a home, Nate, a reason to keep living." He cupped her face, brushing a thumb along her cheek. "Then promise me you'll never leave it." "I'm not going anywhere," she whispered. Outside, the mountain wind carried the scent of pine and promise. And inside that cabin, where two broken souls had found each other in the heart of a deadly storm, love burned brighter than any fire. Sometimes love doesn't come wrapped in flowers or soft words. It arrives like a storm, fierce and wild, testing who you are and what you're willing to hold on to. Rory ran into the snow to escape a cruel world, and instead found the one man who could thaw her frozen heart. If this story reached you tonight, tell me, where in the world are you listening from? Because every time you share your thoughts, you remind us that kindness, courage, and second chances still matter. Stay with us. The next mountain tale is already waiting for you.